Greetings everyone and welcome to the newest video from Boo2 Inc. I am of course Manly Van Lee and we are going to talk bounty hunters.
Bounty hunters? We don't need that scum.
Yes, sir.
That's right, bounty hunters. Out of a 46-second clip from The Empire Strikes Back, I was in love when I was a kid. That's all it took for me to fall in love with these weird, quirky characters, all the way from IG-88 to Dingar. I had the books, I had the toys, I had everything. So today we're going to be ranking every single bounty hunter in the faction in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, up to and including the Mandalorian and Greef Karga, who are the two newest characters to be included in the group. Now, a couple of caveats first before we get into the list. Number one, I did not include ships or even think about ships. So even though IG-88 has IG-2000 as his ship and it's required for Han's Millennium Falcon, I didn't think about that when considering this list. This is strictly these characters used in PvE and PvP in squad battles. And this is going to be just a taste. I am only ranking these bounty hunters, but I am putting together a bounty hunter guide, which will be a video that is quite a bit more in-depth, discussing the team compositions, the Zetas you need, etc., etc. But for today's purposes, this is just who is good and why. Now, as for all of the rankings that I've given these characters today, you will see three categories of which I've assigned them a number from 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. And those categories are versatility, meaning how many different team compositions is this character good in with bounty hunters, necessity, meaning how important is it to have one of these characters in your A-team, in your best bounty hunter squad, and finally in utility. And utility is a little bit different. It is not a scale of 1 to 10. It is a scale of 1 to 2, and it basically just means, are they good in PvE? 1, and are they good in PvP? 2. If they're good in both, they get both points. If they're only good in one, they get 1 point. So let's just dive right into it. Number 1, the best bounty hunter in this game is in fact Lizard Boy himself, Bossk. As you can see here, Bossk gets 10s in both versatility and necessity, and then a 2 in utility, meaning he got the maximum amount of points available here. Versatility is a 10 because he belongs on every single bounty hunter team. Necessity is a 10 because he belongs on every single bounty hunter team. Doesn't matter what the composition is, Bossk needs to be there. And then, of course, he is usable in both PvE and PvP to the extent that bounty hunters are usable. Bossk is just a very good character, and he is a pain in the ass to farm, but definitely worth it. And like I said, I didn't even factor ships into this. If you do that, considering Bossk has probably the best ship in the game right now, that only elevates his status further. So if you have not farmed Bossk yet, I recommend getting on it as quickly as possible. Moving on to the number 2 bounty hunter on our list, the second best in the game, and we are talking about the OG clone boy himself, Jango Fett. Jango actually matches Bossk in points here. He gets a 10 in versatility, a 10 in necessity, and a 2 in utility. I suppose I ranked him slightly less just because he's strictly an attacker, and there are many attackers in bounty hunters. You can find your damage elsewhere, although you won't quite find as good of damage as you will with Jango here. His permakill is amazing. His survivability is pretty solid for a bounty hunter because he gets bounty hunter's resolve. He's just overall a very good bounty hunter and someone that you need to put in your squad to really do some damage and get you set up to win the match. Now we'll go ahead and keep it in the family because up next we have the original bad boy himself and Jango's clone son, Boba Fett. I think we're at the point now where you might see some disagreements happening. You might say this character's better than this one, etc., etc. I go with Boba here not only because his numbers look good, 8 versatility, 7 necessity, and 2 in utility, but because a few of his mechanics can really change the tide of a battle. He also has a permakill if he uses his execute ability properly. He also has quite a bit more survivability than some of the others because he has bounty hunter's resolve. He's just overall a very nice character to have in your bounty hunter lineup and usually finds himself in the top several compositions. Now let's see if we can ruffle some feathers here with our next selection, number 4 in the top-ranked bounty hunters list. I'm going with Carl Weathers himself, Greef Karga. This might be the first real surprise of my list of the top-ranked bounty hunters with Greef Karga here at number 4, but as the only true real support character in the faction. He holds the key to doing a lot of things for the group. He has a huge mass assist, which adds a ton of damage, particularly if you have the Zeta, which, by the way, reads plus 20% bonus damage, something like that. It doesn't seem like much, but when you have Jango Fett, Boba Fett, Aura Singh, Imbo, a bunch of these bounty hunters that already do a bunch of damage, adding 20% damage to that, it gets to be huge. He can also reduce cooldowns and is quite tanky for a support character simply because he also gains stealth quite often. So a really nice addition to the bounty hunter squad, and someone I was excited to see as a huge fan of the Mandalorian show, as well as just Carl Weathers himself. Coming in at number 5 on the list is Toilet Boy himself, Dengar. Like so many of his fellow bounty hunters, Dengar is also an attacker, but unlike those other bounty hunters, he doesn't really do a ton of damage. I personally have my Dengar at R3, and the damage isn't really that high, but that's not why you have him on your team. As you can see the numbers here, we have 7 versatility, 8 necessity, and 2 utility. He can fit in a lot of different team compositions, but he's important to each and every one of them. Under a Bossk lead, he's pretty much your healer, because his mass assist will either debuff or not debuff your enemies, and you'll gain a bunch of health and protection back. Under a Jango lead, he has the ability to attack multiple people. He does an AoE. He just does a lot of things right, and he's also quite hard to kill because of his stealth mechanic and because he is a bit tanky as far as bounty hunters go. So a real nice addition here to any bounty hunter squad. Next up, we have the star of Disney Plus's hit show, The Mandalorian, The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian brings something to the bounty hunter faction that is really, really cool. And no, I'm not even talking about his disintegrate ability, which is awesome. I'm actually talking about his turn meter gain ability, which comes on his unique. With a Zeta, he actually shares it with other bounty hunters, and that's something not a lot of bounty hunters had. So it's a nice little addition to have. His disintegrate, like I said, is awesome. He also brings a bunch of extra damage in the way of crit chance, crit damage up, all kinds of fun stuff. So he's a really, really nice option to the squad. I rank him a little lower than his fellow new bounty hunter, Grief Karga, because he's just an attacker, essentially, and bounty hunters already had a whole bunch of those. So even though he's a really good attacker, that isn't necessarily something that the faction needed. This one surprised me, but next up we have one of my personal favorite bounty hunters in the game, Imbo. Kind of like I hinted at with the Mandalorian, there are just a ton of attackers in the bounty hunter faction, and Imbo is no different. And boy, he does some crazy, crazy damage. The thing that Imbo does best, though, is he has a dispel on his basic, and that is something not a lot of bounty hunters have. If you're running the Geonosis territory battle, Imbo is an awesome, awesome addition for you because he will deal out some damage, and he will knock away some of those pesky taunts that you'll have to deal with. So I do recommend farming him and gearing him, but the problem is because he doesn't really debuff much, he doesn't really fit in on those Jango or Bossk teams as well as some other characters. Even though that dispel is so important, you can use him there for sure and be successful with him. Next up on the list is a bounty hunter that Jango Fett hired to try and kill Padme Amidala in Attack of the Clones, Zam Wesell. Zam has been pretty underrated for quite a while now, but the problem, as you can see here with her rankings, 4 versatility, 4 necessity, and 1 utility, there's just not a lot of use for her. She fits in amazingly if you have her as a lead, but again, Bossk lead is better than her lead, and she fits in great on a Bossk lead, but she doesn't quite do as well with some of the other leads or some of the other compositions that we're seeing, particularly with Grief and Mando coming into the fray. So I like her. She's strictly a thermal detonator addition, but her basic doesn't really do any damage on its own. All of her damage comes from thermal detonators, so don't expect her to work too well in any raids, particularly if your opponents can resist or have high enough tenacity. I like her, but there are better options. Number 9 on the list is a character strictly from the Clone Wars television show, Cad Bane. I don't dislike Cad Bane per se, but there's just not that much use to be had here. He does double tap on the basic, and he does stun with his special move, and he has some TM mechanics that can make him go fairly often, but the overall package just isn't as good as several of the other bounty hunters. So if it's early game and you're looking for another bounty hunter to do a credit heist with, Cad Bane is perfectly acceptable. He's just not that useful anywhere else. So at this point, if you're late game, just pass. Don't worry about it unless you're really planning on working on all of the bounty hunters. Next up, we have a niche use character, and that is Greedo. Greedo is one of those characters where you read the kit and you think, oh wow, this could be so amazing, because he essentially has an infinite damage attack in his basic, which if he crits, he has a 50% chance to attack again with no limit. So essentially he could just go non-stop. In practice, it doesn't quite work as well. Really, at this point in the game, his only use is in the Sith raid, where you can use him under Imbo as a Part 1 team or Phase 1 team, or you can use him in Phase 3 in one of those wacky teams with a whole bunch of other people, where he can do some decent damage. The problem is the Sith raid is nothing now. If you have clones, you don't need anyone else, essentially, so not really a whole lot of use to be had here. Yes, if he's at R7, he's useful, but every single other bounty hunter essentially has better use than Greedo at that same point. The penultimate name on our list is another bounty hunter from the prequel era, Aurra Sing. There are quite a few Aurra Sing users out there who are cursing at me, screaming diligently at their screens, but I'm sorry, she's not bad, but she does things that pretty much everyone else already does. So for a niche character and someone who has a broken lead, Zeta, who primarily was used for Part 3 of the Sith raid, there's just no reason to have Aurra Sing at this point. I think she's useful, and I think if you're fielding 2 bounty hunter teams, I probably have her in the starting lineup of your second one, but overall, there are just other options that are a little bit easier to farm that can do a better job for what you're looking for. And that's why she comes in at number 11 of 12 on the bounty hunters list. And if you haven't figured it out, we are moving on to our final bounty hunter, the last one on my rankings list, and that is IG-88. Much like the other lower tier bounty hunters, there is a use for IG-88. It's just not a great one, so unless you're utilizing him in a 6 months ago necessary General Grievous nuke team, there's no real reason to have IG-88. Even if I included ships, his ship with the Malevolence fleet isn't that great, so there's just no real reason to put any effort or energy or even time into IG-88. So at this point, just skip him and move on. If you really like the character or you're just that desperate, sure, I guess he does target lock, but other than that, no thanks. Okay, folks, that does it for my rankings of the 12 bounty hunters in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. If you hated the list, great, fine, tell me all about it. I definitely want to read and hear what you have to say. If you like the list, sure, definitely tell me about it. I want to hear what you have to say. No matter what, let's get a conversation started. And keep an eye out because I will be releasing a much more in-depth guide involving these characters. I'll talk about their uses, whether or not you should Zeta them, because there are several you don't really need to, and overall the best way to just stack a couple of teams out of these characters. As you can see below, you can reach me on Twitter at ManlyVanLee. Of course, you can also reach me via Gmail at butuinc@gmail.com. And finally, if you like what I'm doing here, don't hesitate to head on over to patreon.com/butuinc and toss me a buck or two. I'd appreciate it. Every little bit you do makes it to where I can do a lot more of these videos, and that would be awesome. But until next time, thanks again for checking out Butu Inc. I'm ManlyVanLee, and we'll catch you later.
SWGoH Gaming. America #1.